Hey, everybody, welcome back to Your Inside Track to Success. As always, I'm your host, Stuart Cranes. We have another great guest for you this week. Before I introduce him, please be sure to like and subscribe. Hit that little bell icon wherever you are catching this podcast episode. We are going to be going to 2 episodes a week later on this year, and we definitely don't want you to miss any of the amazing guests or messages that we're going to have for you coming up. So, today's guest and subject matter expert is somebody that I've just gotten to know, but in reading a bit about the book that he is coming out with and that I've actually gotten to dive into a little bit. Haven't read the whole thing yet, but I can't wait to finish it because it is just so good. We're just going to talk about forgiveness. This is something that I think a lot of the folks listening to this show can really lean into in their lives to see what that creates for themselves. And while I know so many of you are doers, are able to achieve and create the big, amazing, beautiful things with your lives that you're up to, it's those deep relational things, not only to self and to others, that I think we often overlook. I think the doers and the achievers in our lives often overlook. And so this author is a podcast host. He has written and is coming out with the book Broken Places, A Sacred Journey of Repair. And I wanted to actually kick this off. I don't normally do this, but I want to kick off by reading an excerpt that is a part of the marketing for this book so that you understand why I wanted to have him on today to have this conversation. In relating to forgiveness, he writes, "For most of us, forgiveness is a long haul healing process. It's not cheap and easy, and it ain't for softies." Facts. It's a toe to toe heavyweight boxing match with a seemingly impenetrable opponent. It's brutal blows and endless rounds, hits that land us face down on the mat. Like everyone, he's taken hits and he almost didn't get back up. However, one of the beautiful things about forgiveness is it's actually a gift for yourself as much as it is about forgiving the person. And so, without further ado, I want to welcome RJ Rossi on the show. RJ, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stuart, and thank you for reading a bit of my book and giving that plug.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show this week. I just want to dive right in. I mean, the topic of forgiveness is such a big one, it's such a heavy one. Just bringing up the topic of forgiveness is going to elicit some type of feeling. What propelled you to write a book dedicated to the subject?
What propelled me to write this book is that I was stuck in my life for many years precisely
Mhm.
because I was holding on to grievances for decades. In the book, I use my primary example as my relationship with my father, which I should say distraught relationship with my father,
Mhm.
and a list of other people. I think forgiveness is very fascinating. Or holding grievances is fascinating because we don't just have one person on that list. We've got the big bad wolves on the list, and then we've got a whole host of other ones on that list. They could be the person at the DMV that was short with us and rude to us. They could be the
Mhm.
person that cut us off on the freeway. It could be the person that perpetrated violence to us, emotional or physical. So our list of grievances is, I should say, mine was very long, and it still can be long to this day. So just because I wrote the book on it doesn't mean that I practice this perfectly. But what I essentially saw was that I could not lift off in my life because I was weighed down by the heavy burden of resentment.
Mhm.
And I thought I had gone through a forgiveness process with my biological father. I thought I wanted to share that process. I wanted to share that experience with people in writing this book. And as I was writing the book, I got deeper into my own experience of forgiveness. And it re-taught me what I thought I learned. I was trying to encapsulate it into something digestible for myself and for other people. And I want to add to that, while I was recording the audiobook, I was actually going through some more relationship drama with a blast from the past that had resurfaced.
Mhm.
And I'm reading my own book and I'm going through all of this anger and frustration and confusion. And I'm reading my own book out loud in the studio, going, damn, I was so wise when I wrote this book. So I do think that forgiveness is a lifelong challenge. I describe it in the book as a hero's journey. If any of your listeners know anything about Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey,
Mhm.
um, it will propel you into a journey within yourself and within the hearts and minds of other people when you decide to actually embark on the journey rather than resist it and stay stuck in bitterness and anger and resentment and everything that comes along with that, all of the physiological diseases that come along with holding on to hatred,
Mhm.
and all of the social diseases that come along with holding up to hatred. If you think you're going to hold on to hatred for one or two people and it's not going to affect you and the people around you, you've got some more lessons to learn.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love that you actually call it holding on to hatred, because hatred is such a ugly, ugly feeling and emotion and causes such damage, not only in society, but with ourselves internally. I had actually heard resentment as taking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Something you hit on is that forgiveness is a challenging thing. Like it's not just as easy as snapping our fingers more often than not. But what have you found worked for you? And is there any advice you would give folks on how to start their own journey of forgiveness with whoever that might be?
The first thing I want to say is the act of forgiveness is actually quite simple. It's our resistance to forgiveness that is challenging. Forgiveness, simply described, simply put, is letting go.
Hmm.
You're holding on to something, you let go. That's an easy act. But when we resist letting go and we can't let go and we don't want to let go, that's where the rub is. That's where the rubber meets the road. It's our resistance. So you said that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself. It truly is. And we do it to ourselves. We may have an experience. Somebody may have done something absolutely heinous to you. But if you're holding on to it 20 years later, who's to blame for your pain? If you're
Yeah.
reviewing this 20 years later, and I say 20 years because I'm 51, I'm about to be 52 next month, and I think the reason I think I can be an expert at writing this book is because I held on to it for decades. I'm not somebody that just went through a small little thing and said, "Oh, my lawyer burned me with, this experience." And, it took me a year to let go. I really held on. So I just want to predicate by saying the act of forgiveness is easy. It's our resistance that makes it hard. Now, the second part of your question, I believe, was some tips to help people. First, I think you have to get real with the horror inside of you. If you are letting something eat you up inside, and I assume as you said, you have an audience of doers, of movers and
Hmm.
shakers. I am also a mover and a shaker, though I tend to be, I lean more towards a philosophical slant, a spiritual slant. So I may be somebody different than your audience listens to, and this book may be something different than your audience reads. Um, but it's getting real, and it's one of the things that we do to distract ourselves from looking at what's going on inside of us is actually overworking, overdoing, overachieving, doing so much to try to fix and improve upon ourselves. If you look sometimes at the motivation behind that, it may be, I'm not good enough, my life's not good enough as it is. Now, I'm not saying there isn't time and room for growth, but oftentimes when we're caught up in the self-development, personal growth model,
Hmm.
there can be an underlying belief system that says, I'm not good enough. Now, I think looking at that. So, but in relation specifically to forgiveness, if you don't think of yourself as good enough, there's a forgiveness process that needs to happen with yourself. Because
Hmm.
forgiveness, I use forgiveness interchangeably with so many. Forgiveness is showing compassion, it's having empathy, it's um, experiencing inner peace. Forgiveness and inner peace are closely related. There are different words to describe this experience of what true forgiveness is, and people have different. It's another word is mercy, and there are a host of other ones. So I'm breaking it down. I'm using the word forgiveness, but other people could use another word for it. So I think the first thing is just getting real and honest about where you are and being willing to look within, because if you're used to looking outside of you into the world. How can I conquer the world? How can I achieve in the world? All of that is fine and appropriate for people at certain developmental stages. At one point, though, and I want to bring this back to the content of my book, I'm not just talking about my personal journey of forgiveness. I'm exploring the world religious systems. I believe
Mhm.
6 or 7 of the world religious systems, as well as the philosophy and methodology of nonviolence. And the world's religious systems all agree the world ain't where it's at. It's not where the peace, it's not where the lasting peace is. You can't find your peace in the world because everything in the world is impermanent and transient. You're
Yeah.
healthy today, you're sick tomorrow. You're happy today, you're unhappy tomorrow. The relationship's here today, the relationship's gone tomorrow. The money's here
Mhm.
today, the money's gone tomorrow. So I'll say the first thing is understanding this is the first chapter of the book. The first step in forgiveness is recognizing that you are holding on to resentment. And the second one is to recognize that everything in the world is transient. No one is guaranteed anything in the world. So the fact that you or me or anybody else listening has taken a hit in life, it's not unique. It's the nature of reality. You will take hits in life because we tend to want to look for security in the world. We tend to want to find secure footing, a foundation in the world. There isn't. And that's the bad news. The bad news is that the world is an insecure place. Everybody in the world is trying to make it secure. We're trying to grasp on, to hold on to something, whether it's money, relationships, whether it's an education, whether it's power. So those are the first two steps that I would say.
So I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like I'm hearing you say the resentment, the anger, the hatred of like you did me wrong at such and such a time or maybe over a period of time. That's in a way holding something constant, holding it as like a solid constant truth versus leaning into the transient nature of existence. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I think I would add a little piece to that. And I would say
Please
that
do.
it's our expectation that we want security and we are expecting that people are not going to do us wrong, that people aren't going to make mistakes, that this person that I'm in a relationship with, for instance, is not always going to say the thing that strokes my ego,
Right.
right? That's a human
Yeah.
being. And intimate relationships, whether it's your parents, your spouse, your partner, your children, uh, we're all imperfect. And the sometimes we give ourselves a little bit more mercy and understanding because it's easy for me to say, well, I'm messed up and these are my wounds. It makes sense that I did that. Hopefully the other person forgives me. Well, that's another key, understanding that if everybody around the world is crying victim and saying, you did this to me, where are the victimizers?
Mm.
I'm a victimizer. You're a victimizer. We're both victim and victimizer. And it's recognizing that inadvertently we can harm other people and not know it. And then there are people that can do things, I'll say purposely, but I think if they're doing it purposely, there's an unconsciousness about them. They're unconscious about a lot of things if they're out
Yeah.
perpetrating harm on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I definitely agree with you there. So I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying because I know that if I'm having questions, I want to make sure that the audience gets it too. So I feel like you're discussing some very important things here. We're talking about the need to achieve as a way of avoiding like the deep internal work that's there. And additionally, we're also talking about I almost feel like taking ownership of our personal experience, owning like how I'm showing up in the world. Am I holding on to these grudges? Am I also not taking ownership of how I am interacting with you? Like, am I maybe intentionally or otherwise being a bad actor? What is that interplay between being fully responsible? Because we hear in leadership books about being responsible and like getting the result and achieving and going and doing and conquering. but we also get to be responsible for who we be and how we show up in the world and how we are interacting with others. And I'm wondering if you could speak into that a bit more.
First off, I will say 100% to your question. And add to that, yes, 100% responsibility for how we respond to the world. We can't control the world around us. And as you were saying, if I'm talking to an audience of achievers, I think that's hard. It's a hard pill to digest. We can't control the world around us. We can't. We can try to manipulate the world around us. We can try to transform the world around us. And I'm using some particular words here for a reason. But we can't enforce change. If you want to enforce change, you become a dictator.
Mhm.
And so people in leadership positions, I'm in a leadership position right now, and one of my passions right now is understanding servant leadership. And the dichotomy of the words servant and leader being combined is so fascinating because a leader is somebody that gives the orders, but a servant is someone who follows the orders. So, yes, being a grown up, and in the context of my work, being a spiritual grown up, is taking 100% responsibility for your life. 100% responsibility for how you respond to life and how you behave. To truly achieve in life, the doing is secondary.
Tell me
The
more.
being is primary. And what I'm learning right now, I've been rereading this amazing book. I'll give that book a plug. It's called The Tao of Leadership. I forget who the author is, but it really looks at the role of leadership through the lens of Taoism and through a feminine principle. There's a masculine and a feminine principle according to Chinese thought. And the masculine principle is active, it pierces, it penetrates. And the feminine principle is seemingly inactive, but it's more flexible. It is submissive, but there's a power in that when you can lead from a place of the feminine principle, which is to be. And then you marry the being and the doing in a way so that way, when you do, it will be more powerful. But when you are in your being, the doing does not have to happen as often. There's something about sitting in this space where you're allowing things to emerge naturally, whether you're working with a team. If you, as a leader, or if I, as a leader, jump on a problem too soon when people could be working a problem out themselves, or if I feel panicked because there's some problem in my organization that I have to fix right away, hold on a minute. All the pieces aren't in play yet. Sometimes stepping back and watching things unfold is much more powerful. And when you can do that, chances are you're not reacting out of anxiety. You get a chance to get yourself still and respond.
Mhm.
So I think the being is the most important thing until you can sit in that space. I know these are esoteric words, and I'm not sure if your audience is comfortable with these words. So, but to be so that you can do and then you can have materialistically. But when you are in the being state, you feel more abundant, you feel complete, you feel whole. But if you're in the doing state all the time and you're not connected with the being state, you're frantically trying to do so that you can get,
Yes.
so that you can feel complete and have.
Yeah. And oh, that was so important. And folks, please jump in here, RJ, if you think I'm going to miss the boat with this. But I feel like when we're in that frantic place of doing, that's where we find ourselves in this trap of getting all the medals, getting all the straight A's, getting the bigger and bigger bank account, but not having a connection to who we actually are or why we're even doing what we're doing.
I hope people are not misconstruing what I'm saying. I'm not saying achieving is bad.
Not at all.
I love to achieve. I love to feel good about what I've done. Achievement is really good. And achievement, even if it's coming from a space of not being connected with the beingness, the wholeness, achievement still has a value and a purpose. It can help to bolster somebody's self-esteem, and it can help bring somebody to the space of being. Here's the thing about achievement. If you're going at it from not being connected to that internal source within us, eventually you will learn what is all of this for? I'm still not fulfilled. The achievement leaves an emptiness if it's not coming from the state that I'm talking about. And there's nothing wrong with that because that person may have to go through that experience to say, what the hell is all of this for? I'm still not fulfilled. And then they start on the hero's journey, whether you call it forgiveness. I'm going to call it a spiritual overhaul. You have to do the inner work. And I'm using spiritual in a non denominational, non religious sense, but there's
Sure.
the inner work, this internal overhaul that has to happen. What is the meaning of my life? Why am I here? What's my purpose? I have limited time here. I better make it count because we all die. So, those are the philosophical questions that we start to ask ourselves when we've achieved and we don't have a sense of fulfillment, or when we've achieved for 30 years as a CEO and then we're canned by the company and our whole identity was wrapped up in that achievement. So, these are the questions that I think that I'm injecting into the conversation. I see my book as having a particular role, and that is that we're moving further and further away from religiosity. We're moving more and more into a materialistic viewpoint. And I understand why people are moving away from religion. I have my problems with organized religions, the crimes that they've committed socially and the crimes they commit to people because of the dogma and because of the narrow-mindedness and other areas, hatred. But I don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. I think we can look at these ancient traditions, which study after study shows prayer and meditation is healthy for you. Compassion does as much for the person you're giving it to as it does for you, that if you're extending it. So these are timeless principles, timeless things, and that's what I talk about. I talk about the timeless, the things that don't change.
I want to really drill down on this one point. I feel like you've touched on it throughout our conversation, but what is the connection between the being that we're discussing? Like instead of being a human doing, which is what I like to call it, being a human being. So, like leaning into the being and also the forgiveness piece, that hero's journey.
When I speak about being, I'm talking about being connected to your fullness, your sense of inner peace. They are inextricably intertwined. Forgiveness is the process to get there. It's the vehicle to get to inner peace. If we're walking around feeling victimized in the world. And I would guess that everybody in some way, shape, or form feels victimized. Could be a tiny slight, it could be a larger slight. So forgiveness is the vehicle to get to inner peace. Now, like I said, that word forgiveness has been historically looked at as one thing. You've done something wrong to me. Out of my magnificence, my arrogance, and I forgive you. I think that can be a limited view of forgiveness. I see forgiveness as something that happens moment by moment by moment. I'm living in Southern California. Traffic is everywhere. I've been here for 5 years. I am still not used to traffic. Let me tell you something. I walk through work. I feel like I've gotten a good handle on servant leadership and I'm in flow a lot of times. And in my personal life, and I get on that freeway and I feel like there's a monster inside of me. I always imagine, this is terrible, but I imagine sometimes I wish this was a video game and my car had these little guns that I could pull out and I could start shooting cars off the road. That underneath that anger and frustration and anxiety is this feeling of being victimized. And it's fear,
Yeah.
and sometimes I have to remind myself, like, everybody on this road is just trying to get from point A to point B. And they're travelers on the road with me. So it's just a shift in perception, looking at things a little
Mhm.
differently. This is pretty simplistic. I really do believe that there are two ways of looking at things. One is through the lens of fear, anger, sadness, hatred, depression, through a negative lens. I hate the word negative, but through a negative lens, or through a more positive lens, which is love, empathy, compassion. And if you simplify it for yourself, it makes decision making easier. Ah, there I am. I'm caught in my fear again. I'm caught in my insecurity again. It's just my insecurity. Is there another way of looking at this? Now, I in my book, I approach the process of forgiveness as a final step. The first step is recognizing that you're holding on to your resentments, that those resentments are yours and yours alone. The second one is to pull them back. This is mine. Let me look at it. But when you look at it, you don't look at it with judgment, the beady eyes of judgment. You look at it with the loving tenderness of compassion and empathy. And then the final step, this is my experience. Not everyone may agree with this, but the final step is to ask a wiser part of yourself. You may call that God. You may call that may be a religious avatar. It may be the spirit. It may be just a wiser part of yourself, but you step back and you ask it for guidance. So forgiveness to me is not just letting go, it's stepping back and letting a wiser part of yourself guide you. And that's where prayer and meditation come in. Prayer is, in a sense, let me get my ego out of the way. Let me stop doing this on my own. Let me step back and ask a higher power, a higher authority to do this for me. Because guess what? I'm effing this up left and right. I can't get it right. So you step back. And meditation surely is the act of stepping back, whether you practice mindfulness, mantra meditation, um, it's a stepping back. I describe it in my book as the watcher within. We all have a watcher within. Maybe there are some fans of Marvel Comics and the Marvel Comics movie. There's this alien race called the Watchers, and their job, their lot in life is to observe and record. And they are not to interfere with the workings of other species. Their job is to just watch and witness. They're called the Watchers. I didn't come up with the term watcher within because of them, but I was a big comic book fan when I was younger. Maybe unconsciously, that's why I did it. But there's a watcher within. It's described in many ways in different traditions. It could be just mindfulness, Buddha nature, Christ nature. Um, in Hinduism, they call it the silent witness. But there's a part of us that's inviolate, and it just can watch without judgment. And then when you can start watching yourself internally, your thoughts and emotions going up and down, and you can watch the world around you from that space. It's like being the director and watching versus being an actor in the play. If you're the director of the play, you're watching it.
Mhm.
Or if you're the audience, you're watching it. But if you're an actor, you have to be so invested in that. Your emotions have to be invested. You've got to partake in it. So, in a way, we're the actor and the director at the same time. We have to fulfill our roles in life. In the Bhagavad Gita, which is a Hindu sacred text, one of the lessons in that is that I think it's Arjuna is about to embark in a battle, and
Mhm.
Krishna, the god of compassion and love, intercedes, and they have this dialogue between each other throughout the Bhagavad Gita. And one of the major lessons is that you have a role in life, fulfill your role. And so Arjuna goes forward with being a warrior because that's his role. But he has to look at it from a different vantage point and understanding that he isn't the warrior, he is the inviolate space within the warrior, beyond the warrior. It's like he's hovering above the battleground. And if we can recognize that we are hovering above the battleground of life, fulfill our roles, try to be good people. I don't think it's permission to be an asshole. It's you still make decisions, but you just kind of step back and watch it a little bit. That little divestment, again, if forgiveness is letting go, that's letting go, stepping back.
So to go back to your analogy with the director watching the production of the movie unfold, is it so that as the director we can call cut, like I'm calling like a cut here because I see myself going into the fear, the anger, the all these things that are from my ego that are not serving me, that are not serving my, as you're calling it, the servant leadership out in the world? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
I like that. Yes, you do have volition as the director. You're not just watching the movie, you're the director. Like I said, you're toggling, you're playing because you are playing a role in it. So you are an actor in there, but as the
Mhm.
director, the part that's the director, yeah, cut, stop, stop everything. I'm getting off the ride because guess what? My thoughts are crazy right now. My thinking is insane. I want to send an email. I want to make a phone call. I want to tell somebody off. I want to have this conversation. Do
Yeah.
not do anything unless the house is on fire, unless it's an emergency situation. Sit your butt down, wrestle the demons within yourself before you embark on something in the world that you need to address, change, fix, have a conversation. It's very important. I don't remember what the exact line is. But it's all wars are fought within the minds and hearts of men. Fight your battles internally first. That may
Yeah.
mean seeing a therapist. It may mean talking to someone. It may mean getting counsel. It may mean reading inspirational texts, but wrestle it down first. And then when you get into the world and you have a sense of peace about it and a sense of knowing, chances are your intuition is now guiding you and not your fear and anxiety. And you will inevitably flow through the situation in a more effective way. So, for the doers and achievers in the world, this is very, very practical.
Yeah.
Step
Absolutely.
back, get quiet, take time out every day, especially in the morning. Especially in the morning. I know people like to run to the gym, and sometimes people say gym is their church, and I get that. But sit down for 2 minutes. If it's only 2 minutes at first, start with two and meditate. Read some uplifting spiritual literature. Start your day like that. And when you give your life over to that vantage point at the beginning of your day, it's easier to catch yourself when you're ready to. It's easier to catch yourself when you the committee of crazy in your head.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
When
is
they
a
start to
committee. It's a
take
committee of
over.
multiple voices,
Yeah.
and those
Absolutely.
voices are accusatory. The when you're crazy, and I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I'm not trying to be pejorative. When we're caught up in the committee of crazy, those voices are accusatory.
Hmm.
They are accusing you, other people. They see the world through the lens of fragmentation and separation. We don't have a shared purpose. It's you and me. It's you against me. So there's no wisdom there.
Oh, so, so good, RJ. Thank you for diving into that for us. We do get to switch over the focus to your book, but the last thing I want to make sure that we really hit on here, we've talked a lot about spirituality, and I am using that in the broadest sense. I personally am of the Christian faith, but everybody has the belief system that works for them or lack thereof. And my question for you is, in your experience and also in what you're describing, is it possible for somebody to do this type of work for themselves if they don't have some type of faith system in place?
100%. I think the experience, and you talk about a religious experience, the word religion comes from the Latin word religare, which means to bind back. Okay. So you want to bind back to the experience. There are people who claim to believe in God that when you watch their life, they ain't practicing what they preach. And there are those who are atheists that, in my opinion, are conspiring with God every day. And to me, God is love. God is this all-encompassing love of the Greeks called it agape love. It's an impersonal love for all of life that is experienced as personal. It's impersonal because it envelops everything, simply because everything already is connected. So it really is just a recognition of the nature of reality. It's all connected, it's all one. So, yes, 100%. I would rather be with an atheist that is empathetic and loving and kind than with a religious zealot who, thinks they know everything and wants to beat somebody over the head with their particular spiritual sacred text.
Amen to that. Amen to that. This is something my wife Jennifer and I talk about a lot. It's not just who we claim to be, it's actually who we be. Like, and then also what our deeds are out in the world. Like, are we embodying this love? Like, are we being, I know we talked about this in this conversation, but are we good actors? Are we showing up in a way that is representative of the faith that we claim to be adhering to? And so thank you for giving us your thoughts on that.
Can I add
Oh,
something to that?
100%. Absolutely.
Um, I grew up in Catholicism, which is a brand of Christianity. And I remember growing up and hearing often, it's not what you do that matters in Christianity. It's the relationship with Jesus as your personal savior. And I know it does matter what you do, but I'm just saying there was more of an emphasis on salvation, personal salvation, and less an emphasis on the social gospel of how you can help people. Now, in Judaism, it's interesting because in Judaism, they have what's called a mitzvah. I hope that this is correct. I hope I'm not just making things up. But they have what's called a mitzvah, and it's a deed, something that you give and do for other people. You
Yes.
do not have to like the person you give something to. You do not have to like the person that you give to. And that matters. That matters. Now, I think ultimately, if you could marry those two viewpoints, I think having the love in your heart, giving from a space of compassion and kindness, and also participating in the world and giving and sharing and helping and supporting. I think if you can look at the deed and like I say, it's the same things I said before. These are all recycled, it's recycled language. It's the being and the doing and the having.
RJ, I think I lied. I do have one last question I want to be sure to ask
Good. I like liars.
because because I think I want to just tie this all back home for all the doers and achievers listening to this show. What are maybe the biggest tangible results in your life that you have created as a result of leaning into and doing the work of forgiveness for yourself?
Yeah, your viewers will like this. Your listeners will like this. There's a lot of conversation about being in a state of flow, the psychological state of flow, right?
Mhm.
Where you are at optimal abilities, you are enjoying the experience, time kind of flutters away, you're just like flowing. Well, guess what? Achievement and having that inner stillness, that inner security go hand in hand. Because if you are doing the inner work, you find yourself in flow more often. I know that the psychologists have kind of broken down what to do to get to flow. I think it's like doing a task, being immersed in it, something you're good at. If it's more than 4 or 7% over your ability level, then you can kind of mess up the flow or something like that. Well, what I'm saying and what ancient traditional spiritual paths are saying is that you can be in a state of flow every day in every moment, ideally. It's an ideal.
Mhm.
I don't think we should beat ourselves over the head if we're not there. But because there's work to be done, we are deeply flawed. People are deeply flawed. And I think another thing to remind yourself, I come from a spiritual perspective. People throw these words around it, salvation, enlightenment. Don't get too cocky. Don't get too cocky. I think if you can hold the mirror up as much as possible and recognize that my one responsibility is to monitor my own mind, my own reactions, my own responses. That's my one responsibility. And if you're doing that right, you'll probably see that you're not in flow, that you're not loving people all the time. And when you catch yourself off guard, look at it like a GPS system. Those negative emotions, quote unquote, negative emotions, are red lights on your dashboard. They're letting you
Yeah.
know, stop, take a look under the hood, bring it to the shop, pull the car over. And then I use another example in my book, and I actually use that example of the red lights on the dashboard for your emotions. Um, when we're learning how to drive, the driver's manual teaches you that if there's inclement weather, pull the car over. Don't drive when the roads are icy and pull the car over. Now, most people don't do that. Unless the roads are really bad, most people are not pulling over. But that's what the driver's manual says, the instruction manual says. Well, if you look at inclement weather, yield signs, if you're looking at your life and you're walking into a situation that, oh, wait a minute, something's not right. Oh, this is messy. Pull the car over. If you're experiencing the red light on the dashboard, something's going on inside of you. You're just like seeing it from a state of ignorance, from a state of from a lack of compassion, from a lack of insight. Pull the car over. And the more you learn to balance the pulling the car over and then the doing, the being and the doing, the being still, be still and know is a line from the Old Testament. Be still and know. There's an Indian, when I say Indian, I mean Hindu. There's an adage from India that says the deeper the rest, the greater the activity.
Mm.
People are running around, running, and especially in America, in the Western world, do. You got to achieve. You got to just, well, guess what? The more rest you have, and I'm not just saying sleep, the more psychological, emotional rest you have, the more you're able to achieve in the world because you're just energized. We all know this. Get 8 hours of sleep, and how do you feel? And you can conquer the world. Get three
Yes,
hours sleep, and what's going on?
exactly. Oh man, so good. RJ, where should folks connect with you to learn more about you, about your book, Broken Places? Where can they continue this conversation off of the show?
Well, I do have a website, rjderossi.com. It's actually being revamped right now. This is my first book, so I'm kind of putting all these things together right now. You can also find me on social media. Currently, I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I have Threads. I'm on YouTube. That's where I post my podcast, The RJ DeRossi Show, which is a new podcast where I'll be interviewing guests who inspire me. And I'm also on TikTok, though not a single thing is posted on TikTok. So follow me on there, but be warned, there's nothing there. Um, my book is on Amazon right now. Currently, it's in soft launch, which means that only the digital book is available. The paperback will be available soon, and then about a month after that, which I'm assuming with some of your readers, they want the audiobook. I'll be releasing the audiobook about a month later.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And folks, we're going to make sure all of RJ's links and also links to the book Broken Places are made readily available in the show notes, the descriptions of, again, anywhere you are catching the show. So you're not far away from ways to get in contact with RJ. RJ, what's maybe one of the last things you want to leave with people as it relates to forgiveness and the conversation we're having today?
We're really talking about love. What is the use of power if you're not using it for loving purposes? Anybody can be powerful. Power is an illusion. It's it's impermanent and it's based on a false sense of identification to feel like you have to have power in the world and power over other people. But when you recognize that the basis of your existence, the purpose of your existence is to learn to love with a greater capacity every day, what you do in the world will be more powerful. The more you divest from feeling like you have to do in the world and be in the world, the more you can pull back from the world. When you do enter into it, the more powerful you are in it. And forgiveness is that process of stepping back, letting go, letting a wiser part of you lead. And there's more to this. My book also talks about the reconciliation process, which we have not talked about, but we're talking right now about the inner transformation. But once you get to the inner transformation, any reconciliation that you may or may not have is driven from a place of love. And so that's my final message. Like, let love be your guide. It's not just something for romantic partnerships and for your children. The world is a broken place. No pun intended with the title of my book. The world is a broken place and it needs loving hands, loving words, loving feet. It needs people to interject that as much as possible because there are a lot of people hurting and suffering out there. And if you've gone through something that was very painful and you get to the other side, you have something to give. You know the
Yes.
power of transformation and you can be a witness, a test, your test into a testimony. There's a lot of different ways to say that, but you truly know how to be present with somebody when you've gone through it. So let your work be led by love and let your entire life be led by love with an honesty. I am not one of these frilly, new agey people that just assumes that we're always going to be happy. But there's a way to even express and be with the unhappy experiences with authenticity and honesty. And I think that's my message.
So does love always win?
Love can win. Doesn't always win, but it can win if we
Hmm.
choose it And if you equate love with things in the world going right, quote unquote, right, then you will be back at square one, angry and bitter with the world. So love, which is the inner experience of an interconnectedness with life, I do believe that wins. That doesn't mean that
Yeah.
everybody around you is in sync with that. It doesn't mean that the world is going to roll out the red carpet and everything's going to go right. God bless you if your life is going right. But guess what? It will at one point not go right. So I do believe love wins. And I think it's the task of every person on this planet to do our best to build a world whose foundation is based on humanitarian values of love. That doesn't mean that we can always achieve it, but the internal experience of love, I do believe it wins. And I can say this proof of this when people are on their deathbed. I saw my mother die, and I was holding her hand when she died, and I was with her often. I saw her body was falling apart. She wasn't able to do anything. She was experiencing pain constantly, and yet there was this inner light inside of her. Her love, her compassion, her tenderness was growing in spite of the fact that her entire world was shrinking. So I do believe that love wins.
RJ, that was so beautiful, and I don't think I could have said any of that any better myself. And so thank you for doing that for us here on this show. I wish we had a lot more time, but just to wrap this up, a question I ask every single guest on the show. What are you acknowledging yourself for today?
I'm acknowledging myself for being on your podcast because this is the first podcast that I've had the privilege of being a guest on. I know what it's like to be the person interviewing, and I was nervous and I was challenged with how to distill what I've written in an entire book into questions that people could understand. And I'm acknowledging myself for showing up and getting and doing this.
Well, I can promise you it's not going to be the last podcast you ever make an appearance on because you absolutely made an impact today. Just to say it, and I have no problem saying this in front of the listeners, you you kind of know when it's a good episode or not when you're recording with somebody. Like for me, I actually just kind of get like a feeling in my body. And for me personally, I know I needed a lot of this today. Like just for myself, I needed a lot of what you had to say. And so I know that this is going to make a huge impact for the folks that listen to this episode.
Mm,
So I'm
thank you.
acknowledging you, RJ, and I, am super excited to be a part of, the book launch and supporting other people and creating this type of, beautiful way of being for themselves and their lives.
Thank you.
And so
Thank you.
thank you for
When,
being on the show.
one last plug. If you download the book, please write a review. First time authors, we need
Absolutely.
reviews. Thank you.
Yep. And folks, pick up your copy on Amazon. Again, as RJ mentioned, it will be coming out on Audible as well. Wherever you get the book, ultimately, please be sure to leave him a review so that more and more people can get connected to RJ and his work. And more importantly, just live happier, more fulfilled lives. Like that's what this show is about. That's why I wanted to have RJ on. And folks, if you got any value out of today's episode, and I know you did, please share this with somebody. Make sure that you share it with somebody you care about. Even share it with somebody who maybe you're not on the best of terms with from that place of love, from that place of forgiveness, so that the impact here continues to multiply tenfold. And so, folks, this has been your inside track to success. We will see you next week with another guest or message. We'll see you then.